Today's guest holds two master's degrees, a PhD in clinical psychology, and is the Director of Product Design for the Centre of Youth Wellness. For over a decade, she has impacted thousands of lives globally. Today, she's going to share with you new insights, ideas, and information to identify trauma. Would you please help me welcome our good friend, Dr. Bre Gentile. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I love it.
My pleasure. Well, you've done a lot of study, and I'm very envious of that study. I've got study envy on that. That's a lot of study. I like that. And you've immersed yourself in the field of psychology for more than a decade. What was the dream that you started with, and what excited you about that dream?
I started with the dream actually to do child psychology. I was super impressed at the fact that within the span of 5 years, an entire attachment was built, and then an entire repertoire of how we see ourselves and how we interact with ourselves as adults was built within that 5 years. So I originally started with child psychology and was really fascinated with attachment, but then became very interested in the brain and how the brain was actually working with attachment. And that study of the brain just led me further and further down psychology until I finally found this niche of like user experience and tech and psychology and how it all kind of meshes and melds together.
Interesting you mention attachments. We talk about this as, say, an imprint period. And we talk about the world imprinting upon you, its attitudes, its values, its beliefs, fears. And in our field, we often talk about trauma has its roots in those first 5 to 7 years of life.
Yeah.
Now, on your journey, have you had any challenges that you've had to overcome? And what has the role of trauma played in your life?
Yeah. Actually, nobody ever asks me that question. And it's really interesting. I find it fascinating that nobody asks me that. But yes, so one of the things that I had personally was my parents were never together. And so they were together and then they were not. And the only thing that really impacted me from that ripple decision was my mom's education had to be prioritized differently. So I had to be raised by my grandparents, aunts, and uncles for little periods of times here and there where she would prioritize school. But what you don't realize is when you don't have a dialogue as a child as to what's happening, it's like the person you love and that you're attached to just disappears. And for all great, wonderful reasons, right? They're trying to get an education to improve your life. But without that dialogue, you're just lost. And so I really, one of the things I try to improve on daily is just like having conversations with children, like just direct conversations of like factual conversations. So even though you're like, I shouldn't share all of it, you're totally right. You shouldn't share all of it, but you can share where you're going, why, and what the whole goal is, so they don't feel completely lost. So that one was a big one for me, and it created a lot of abandonment stuff, attachment stuff. I carried on a little bit of that trauma into my physical body, which led to some physical things, like pre-diabetes and obesity. So the trauma was stored. And now, as a young woman, I'm able to work through it. But it wasn't until my body started screaming out that it needed that attention that I finally was really able to tune into the stuff that was coming up. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Along the way, and you've written about this in your articles on Psychology Today, you talk about the role of a mentor and the importance of a mentor. Now, Dr. Wendy Packman was your mentor. How did this help you along your journey, having a mentor?
It was huge because I kept coming up on barriers after barriers actually in the academic system that was, things that you didn't do this, you didn't check this box, you didn't fill out this form. All along the way. And it was just like, what is happening? And she kept saying, you're resourceful, you'll figure it out. And the word resourceful was something I just carried with me because it was always like, I'll figure it out. I might not take the direct path because I didn't take the direct path. It took me 10 years to complete my doctorate. It took my colleagues 5. It's a 5-year program and it took me 10. And so I really had to hold on to that piece of information of like, you're resourceful. And it came from a source who was already established. And she had 2 degrees. She had done a joint degree in law and psychology. And so I had seen firsthand how you meld things together and you don't take a direct path. And so her saying that was really important.
I find that so frustrating when things take longer. We look around and we see other people doing it in 5 years and it's taking us 10 years. I had an experience when I set a goal to become an Australian champion athlete. I thought I'd just set the goal and overnight I'd be an Australian champion. That's how I thought it worked. There was no steps involved. It was just bang, set the goal. It should manifest because I'm using the law of attraction and I'm saying affirmations and it should be working. And after 9 years, I still hadn't achieved my goal. And it was getting frustrating because there was athletes who weren't as skilled as me, who weren't as dedicated as me, who weren't as passionate as me, who were doing it in 3 years. And it was frustrating. And then I realized that the inner dialogue, the conversation I was having with myself wasn't very healthy. You're not good enough. You're not talented enough. You're not skilled enough. You don't work hard enough. You don't have enough time. You've got to work full time. You don't have enough money. You might get injured. And I go through this whole inner dialogue. And then I finally realized, no wonder it's really hard to move forward. I feel like I'm trapped in the past, maybe still in those first 5 years of my life. And so it was quite interesting. And one of the big ones for me was, what if you get injured? What if you get injured? Rather than, what if you're going to land the trick and become a success? What if you crash and hurt yourself? So the inner dialogue was negative. And I didn't understand the impact because there was no mentor at that stage. You couldn't talk to your friends about, hey, I'm scared. They're like, well, toughen up, have a spoonful of concrete, smoke a joint, have a beer. Like, okay, that's not going to work.
Right.
So that role of a mentor is just so important. Now, companies have to interact with their customers, and there's a whole experience that takes place. So what is user experience and how are you helping your clients understand their users?
Yeah. So I think user experience for most people is really just like how a user interacts with a product or service. For me, it's really about the relationship and the influence that that product or service has on that person. So if it's your banking app, for example, you have a relationship with that app, right? Like you get on there to find out how much you've made, to make a transfer, to find out how much you didn't make, right? You have a relationship with it. And so Wells Fargo, for example, as a bank, has an influence on you. And so it's my job to come in and say, here are your users. Here are the things they face on a day-to-day basis. Here are the feelings that they're coming to you with. Here are the feelings they have when they're on your app. And here's how you can design with them. Here's how you can use all of this insights to design an app that's actually going to have a different relationship or a different influence on them and not just an authority on them. You have to use your banking app, right? Like we do. But we want to have a relationship, not an authority over it. So that's how I view user experience. It's really about how you as a person relate and interact with your app or your service. Yeah.
Now, my terminology might be slightly different. And in marketing and selling, we talk about a geographic. Where are your clients geographically located? We talk about their demographics, their age, their preferences, their education. And what's been emerging in the last few years is a psychographic. And it's really, what are those fears and frustrations that people have right now? What are those desires? What are their aims? What are their goals? What are their objectives? What do they want emotionally? Yeah. So does that sound a little bit similar to this user experience, understanding the emotions that they're coming with? Is that in the same alignment?
Absolutely. One of the tools that we use is called an empathy map. And that's precisely what that is. It's a tool where we really map out kind of what are their frustrations, what are their joys, what are their pains, what are their burdens. And we really get a deeper picture of this persona that we're designing for. What's happening now, though, is that people are starting to reach out to actual users and get their mapping instead of just kind of hitting one or two and then generalizing from there. We're starting to see a little bit of a shift where companies are getting, 5 to 7 or even upwards 15 people and actual real users to do that exercise. So yeah, empathy mapping is what we call it, but that's exactly what we do. Same thing. Yeah.
For my community, we say empathy is understanding the emotional makeup of other people, understanding why they think and feel the way that they do, understanding their challenges. And we believe that's really important because in selling, we say the future of selling is all about relationships.
Right.
People don't care so much about your product and service. What they care about is the relationship. And we say if we can build a relationship with somebody, that removes the risk.
Absolutely.
So it's also a great example of, who are you as an emotional being? How can we take away those pains? It's like having a fire extinguisher. One thing I learned was fire departments used to be private entities in the past. And what would happen is if your house set on fire, you'd negotiate with the fire brigade before they put it out. And so the government stepped in and said, this is not a good business model because you've got somebody really desperate. They've got that fear of loss being triggered. And now you're negotiating. So we're going to make this a public department. And so now the fire brigade goes out, does their job, and then you can talk about compensation later on.
Ooh, thank the Lord. Yeah, that's a lot of empathy and a lot of emotional charge to make that decision in negotiation.
Let it burn. Come on. No, you can't do that. You got to purchase. Now, you wrote a great article in Psychology Today, and I'd love to share this one with the audience. And it was called A Mental Health Focus at the Barbershop. Now, my mother was a hairdresser, and I believed that she was more of a counsellor, and the haircut was just a bonus. So can you step us through this article? What led you to writing this, and what were some of those key takeaways about mental health and for children to have the ability to have a conversation with somebody?
Yeah, definitely. So this was spurred by a gentleman whose name is Lorenzo Lewis, and he's the founder of the Compassion Project. And basically what he has done is he's trained thousands of barbers over, across the United States to have these trauma-informed conversations, these conversations that are really about validating somebody's emotions, getting them, positive feedback, really reflecting, and really giving them a space to say, I'm not okay. And what he saw was growing up similar to kind of, what you said, that he was going to the barbershop and seeing that, people were having these tough conversations. Like they were having full conversations about themselves and really bringing their true selves, and they weren't able to have those conversations. Now, what he saw today was that, therapy for the Black and brown bodies was not where it should be, that it was very difficult for those folks to come to the conversation feeling that they were going to be validated, that they could, trust this person in front of them. And so he thought, why not, instead of trying to change the therapy room, why not just bring the therapy to the places people are? And so that's what he did. And so, I saw this in action when I went to a training here locally in San Francisco, and it was phenomenal to see the barbers just like cry, grown men cry and say like, yeah, we're ready for this. And to see that there's been conversations had where they've changed and actually saved lives, where they're like, man, if you didn't have that conversation with me, I was getting my last haircut. I was like, wow, that's really impactful. And so after I saw it in action, I wanted to write about it because I realized that not only are parents going there, but parents are going there with their kids sometimes too, right? And especially if it's a culture thing, you do bring your kids along with you on a salon day. And so the conversations are really also about like hearing the kids out, especially because they're bringing stuff about COVID and bringing all sorts of things. And it's like, this is also a space for them to be having and hearing how adults can have conversations outside of a doctor's office, right? Or outside of a professional's office, so that they feel they too can have that space that's informal, but really accessible, right? That's why I wrote it.
We go to the salon on Sunday night here in Taiwan, and normally it's after we've been for dinner. So we'll go for dinner, we'll go for a long walk, we'll come home, and my boy Caesar knows it's Sunday night and he's got to get a haircut. And he's the first one to say, let's go to Jen's haircut. And so we go in there and he sits down and he has his 15 minutes in the chair, and he's only 5, but he just talks nonstop to her. Nonstop. And I don't understand Chinese, and my wife's laughing her head off. just about the conversation and the questions. And it's so funny because he jumps in there and it's like he transforms into somebody else for that 15 minutes.
Right.
And they have this great conversation backwards and forwards. And every Sunday, he really wants to go there, either to update her about his week or to ask her a bunch of questions about her week and why she does this and why she does that and what she's eating and why she's eating this. But it's a great conversation. I remember going to the Air Force Base with my grandfather once a week to get a haircut at the barber. And it was a wonderful experience. All the men were there talking about men's business. And you felt like a big boy sitting up there in the barber chair and having a conversation, treated like a man.
Yes, exactly.
A little bit of cologne.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience. And I would say that the majority of haircuts that I've had over the years, the barber or the hairdresser has been more of a friend. They've had that conversation. Hey, how you doing? Oh, are you serious? Somebody's actually asking me how my day is. Oh my gosh, I'm normally asking everybody else, but the roles reverse.
Yeah.
And you start to talk, and sometimes you have that Freudian slip. That thing just rolls off the tongue, and you go, "Oh,
Yes.
I shouldn't have said that." But then you just keep letting it out, and the hairdresser's like, "Wow, this is juicy. Yeah, keep going. Give me more."
Exactly. Yeah. A supportive relationship. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So I used to say to my brother, I said, I can't go back to that hair salon anymore. And he'd say, "Why not?" And I said, "Oh, well, I might have said too much, but I ended up taking one of them out on a date. So now I've got to cross the street and walk up on the opposite side of the street."
Too much collusion. Too much.
Yeah, so much. Now, user experience. How is this benefiting the user? You know, what are some of the benefits in there for the user as they hire somebody like yourself to understand this experience?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the user really gets to be part of this experience. When you're working with me, it's because you want to actually do research or you want to design with the user. And so what the user gets is kind of a behind the scenes experience, right? You get to actually come in, you get to actually, write on the Post-it note, or you get to, do the thing on the screen, and you get to see what it's like from the napkin, concept to the prototyping and the wireframing, and you really get to see what it's like, to see what it takes to get to an app. But then it's becoming more and more immersive, that now we're trying to ask, what do you do on your day when you're like your whole day, right? Like, or what is the whole decision process for determining if you take on a client or not? Like, we're starting to ask them about their decision making and their day and getting to know them as a human. And so they get, this really rare opportunity to be themselves in context of a product or a service that they typically use. That's just not heard of. It's new. It's something that's really new. Outside of a survey, they've never really been brought in to anything like this. So this is something new for them. Very cool.
I was working with Emirates Airline, and I was based in Dubai, and I was a senior flight steward. And my role was to co-lead a team of 17,500 cabin crew. Wow. And as part of our training, we had to understand the customer journey. And so they would show us this journey, and there was this room, and I reckon this picture must have been probably 4 meters wide and 3 meters high, and it mapped out the entire user experience from the moment they saw an advertisement to the next step on clicking on the website, for them speaking to a person on the telephone, for them confirming their ticket, to it showing up in their email, for them showing up to the airport and meeting the people at the airport in the uniform, from going from the uniform through to security, to the gate, to being onboarded on the aircraft, to sitting down. And they had mapped out every single thing. And we were one of the top airlines in the world. And I would put it down to understanding that user experience, because they knew exactly where the wheels would fall off. And the wheels always fall off in aviation, but they could predict it. And then what they had implemented was strategies for service recovery. So on the aircraft, they would say, we're going to upload onto the aircraft 400 chicken meals, 20 vegetarian meals, and 50 beef meals. And then they'd say, the majority of people will eat chicken, but some will miss out. And this is what you do for service recovery. So every flight, somebody missed out. I'm very sorry, sir. 3 bags full, sir. I'm very sorry. And then you go into service recovery. You get them something from business class. You'd bring it to economy class, and they'd be happy.
Mhm.
And you'd do that. And then you'd also know that the in-flight entertainment would not work on somebody's seat, whether the
Mhm.
headphone jack was broken or the screen was broken. And then you went through your whole service recovery. So
Mhm.
either way, the client left feeling good.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then they got off the aircraft, they went through the airport, they got their bags, they left the airport, they went to their final destination.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal to see it at that scale. And I think a lot of people could assume, hey, well, it's okay for a big billion-dollar business. But what about for a small business who's got aspirations of growth? How does it benefit the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about it if you're starting a coaching business, for example, like your friend who was doing all of the coaching for all of the other businesses but couldn't start his. So if you are really trying to understand your users, you don't have to have $1 billion to understand how are they going to get to you, where will they find out about you, and then you go through the map. We call it a journey map. And so you can take a user on a journey without having billions of dollars, and it's completely free, right? If you can do it in your head. Where you start to add up money, or you start to spend money, is when you start getting experts in and saying, let's validate this, right? Let's validate this by asking users to come in and say, what is your journey? What has been your journey with something similar to this? Where you get the bootstrapping is where you do it in phases. You don't do it all at once, right? Like, maybe you don't do the service recovery because you're not banking on a recovery, right? You just want to know if this is going to work. And so what you have to have is you have to have somebody that understands really bootstrapping and startup, and you have to have somebody that understands the phased approach, so that you don't get somebody that has this big scope of work that is, we'll take care of this and we'll think about this, and you're really just here on this one lily pad. And for lack of a better word, it really is about being comfortable with complacency for just a moment, so that you can get enough clarity to then go to your next point and go to your next milestone. But without that complacency and kind of settling in and having a researcher or a designer that's willing to sit with that uncomfortableness with you, it can be really hard, and you just want to go, 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 and you end up frying, or you're hitting a wall, or give up. So
All those personal biases falling in.
yeah.
And this happened to my business for many years. I'm very big picture. I don't like to get down into the details, and I'm very intuitive. So I'll make decisions based on intuition with a lack of information.
Yeah.
But the people that I was selling to had a very different form of psychology when it came to handling policy and constraints. They were very compliant, and their greatest fear was making a mistake, a fear of not having enough information. And so I'm all the way down at the bottom of the scale who says, hey, totally intuitive. Hello's good enough. I understand the whole story. Give me a one-sentence summary. Don't worry about the 500-page book. Just give me a one-sentence summary. So there was this gap. And now I could feel it intuitively, but as the business operator, it's like, well, this is how I want to run my business. But then you realize your business is predicated on the success of your customer. So we went through a reinvention. We said, well, how do we make it more detail-oriented? And I really had to sit myself down, strap my arms to the table so I couldn't leave, and go through that. Well, how can we increase the perceived value by providing more details? So we got very detailed in our program offering. We put syllabuses in place, and the customer satisfaction went up. We gave them training systems that were pre-prepared rather than having to take notes, and the satisfaction went up, and also the retention went up. So for a couple of hours of pain for me, it's worked out to be years of retention for customers later on. And it was well worth the input, and the return was greater than the pain for those few hours.
Yep.
But now we've got it for life. So if somebody is considering user experience, I'm an advocate of it because I know it's transformed my business, and it's no longer about me. It's about the customer. What does the customer want?
Yep.
And we've got to get past our biases and understand the customer.
Exactly. That's right. I love it.
Now, in August, you're going to release a new book, and it's called Higher and Friendly Powers, Transforming Addiction and Suffering. Please tell us more about the book, and what can we take away from the book?
Well, I would tell you all about that book, but that one's not mine. I'm not coming out with that book.
Oh, my apologies.
Whoever is coming out with that book in August, that sounds like a really good book. Mine is not coming out until October.
Oh,
And it is called, this book is about emotions and research.
Oh, well, that's better. Let's talk about that one. Let's talk about emotions and research.
It was titled by my 10-year-old son.
See what happens when we don't pay attention to details?
It happens. It was all in the intuition. It's okay. Yes. So my 10-year-old son titled it after I told him the gist of it, which of course for a 10-year-old needs to be about 12 seconds long. So that was a challenge in and of itself. And he said, yeah, this book is about emotions and research, basically. And I said, yeah, it is. And so it's a book that's, really easy to understand about how empathy should play a role in UX and research and design. It's not really about the role it does play, because I really don't think it plays a role at this moment. And so I really talk about the role that it should play. I break it down into neurotransmitters and things that are going on in your mind. I talk about consumer psychology and consumer neuroscience. And we talk about what it's actually like to engage a user, what neurons are going on there, and kind of going back to attachment, right? Like if you're building an attachment with your users, what sort of trust do you need to put in there? How do you build trust as a tech, as an app, as something you can't feel and touch and talk to? So there's a lot of that happens, and there's a lot of not knowing what to do, but knowing you need guidance. And so this book is really that guidance of just like, start here. Yeah.
Beautiful. Emotions are incredibly important. And according to Harvard, in some of their recent studies, they said that 95% of people claim to be emotionally intelligent, yet only 10 to 15% are. So if us as a business owner, as a professional, if we're not self-aware, it's very difficult to be socially aware, because one comes before the others. If I don't understand my emotional makeup, it's going to be very hard to understand other people's emotional makeup.
Yes.
And in the world of selling today, we have to, and what we believe, we call this the golden triangle of selling. The first 40% of time, we just have to spend building a relationship with the customer, especially in consultative selling. Build the relationship, build the relationship, build the relationship. But as businesses try to scale, it's very hard to have a lot of relationships, because relationships take time. So sometimes tech has to come in. It's like, I love Facebook. I love it. I really do. And it's a free platform, and I've used it for years to build my entire business. And I don't like every feature, but as a whole, I love what they've done. And I believe that they're always trying to improve it. And so somebody's listening. I'm sure sometimes they're watching me on my camera. I'm sure they're listening to me on my microphone, but it's working. So I believe we've all got to work on that. Now, your website's here, Dr. G's Lab. Now, for our friends who want to start the journey with you and to learn more about what you do, where's the best place for them to start on your website?
Yeah, so at the very bottom, there's a contact form that you can fill out. And then also in the very top corner, you'll see the LinkedIn. You can always find me on LinkedIn. That's a really great place to connect. But definitely reach out on the website. And, sometimes you're like, this sounds so good, and I don't know exactly what I need. And that's okay. Just fill out the form. You really don't know what you don't know. And I completely understand what that feels like. So
Begin.
Exactly. Just begin.
Well, Dr. G, thank you so much for being here with us today. I love the journey. I love the story. I love the impact that you're having out there. And I've learned so much, and really just reconfirm the importance of emotional intelligence in business, and to understand the emotional journey of the customer. I think it's just so important. And if all of our businesses paid more attention to that, I don't think we'd have to worry about sales ever again. I think the customer would be so happy that they'd just be happy to buy and buy and buy again, and tell their family, and especially tell their mothers, that we're doing a good job.
Exactly. And happy to share. That's the most important part. Happy to share that they love your product or service. So,
well, before the digital world, in sales, would say the average person knows 300 people by first name. But with social media today, some people have followings of 3,000, 10,000, 20,000 people that they don't know. But as a press of a button, they can make you rich. And this is what happens with those viral videos. Sometimes it gets shared virally, and all of a sudden you go from totally unknown to being a superstar.
Exactly.
And people share products, they share services online, and it's a great time to have all this in place. Dr. G, thank you so much for being here with us today. I appreciate your time. And ladies and gentlemen, remember, one new idea at the right time is enough to make you rich. Have a wonderful day. Dr. G, thank you so much. Wonderful.